Well, it's exciting to do this, and I really thank you for inviting me.
Well, Vita, it's wonderful to see you. I'm glad to have you here. This is the final project of a COVID-based initiative that I started early on last March. So it's interesting, here we are again, almost at March, and these will be starting to be released on March 8th for International Women's Day. So this project was called Revelations, an exploration of the collection in various facets. And for this final chapter, we're looking at women in our collection. So we're very fortunate to have a piece by you called Facing You. But before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about intersections, revelations, the kinds of things that you've experienced this year, either personally or in your practice as a result of COVID, the kind of revelations that you have had.
They've been multiple. I want to say as a basis, I live in Jemseg, New Brunswick, out in the country. I'm retired. So many of the things that people who are working face, I have not had to face. So my daily life of, going up to my studio has continued through that. However, 2 years ago, I bought collectively a very high-end loom, the kind of loom actually I wove Facing You on, a Jacquard loom. And because it's an expensive piece of equipment, I did it with a colleague, Robin Muller, in Halifax. And so that entails going back and forth to Halifax on regular basis to set up the loom, to weave. And so COVID has really made that a difficult time. And when the Atlantic bubble opened, we sped right over there. I could get some weaving done. But the revelation, I think, that comes with that is that when I can't get there, now Robin will say, I could weave that for you. And so, to let go of some of the process and to let your studio mate take on some of the work, it has been really interesting because I'm a maker. I control what I do. I'm a weaver. I like, that's been interesting. And now, of course, as we're in lockdown again, I won't be able to go. I have a project right now, a collaborative project with Pier 21 in Halifax. Just really hard to communicate. Part of that process is being in the museum, walking the museum, feeling the museum, making work from that. And while I can visit their collection online, I can't. It's a completely different situation. So on the good side, I'm getting lots of studio work done of a different kind, returning to some things. I took a class this week on natural dyeing. I'm a chemical dye girl. And I thought, let's just see what this is. And it brought feedback to my chemical dye process. And then I've been going back to dye, shade, gradations. So returning to some basic things that I thought, oh, I've got all that. But you know what? I can enter that space again. And it's been informing what I've been doing after that. So it's been a very interesting time. Mostly it's given me quiet time because even living in Jemseg, we have visitors. Now we don't. So studio time has expanded, and with it, a kind of quiet way to enter studio.
So right now you say you're working on a project with Pier 21. What's that about?
Well, I applied for this, I'm going to say 3 years ago. And it was because my parents are immigrants to Canada, and Pier 21 was always of interest to me. And new immigrants to Canada, how is their experience different from my family's experience? It's just always been central to my interest. And so I thought, I applied for a show at Mary Black Gallery. They're right beside Pier 21. I thought, perfect. I have a loom in Halifax. I'm going to be going back and forth. Just sounds like. And I've loved to interact with museums and art galleries in this way. I did an interaction with the New Brunswick Museum and did a series of work based on, someone that was important to their collection. I did a similar project with the Art Gallery of Burlington. And so this sounded just perfect. Hasn't turned out to be, every collaboration has its problems, but the fact you can't even get there is a really big problem. They're trying to be really helpful. They're supplying me with information, but so I feel like the project is going to change a little bit. It was going to expand it to other immigrants and think about, try to meet some immigrants, new immigrants to Nova Scotia, and perhaps weave their portraits with their patterns. Like Facing You is a portrait with patterns on it. And I feel like that can't happen now. So I'm looking at Latvian immigrants who've come in through Pier 21 and maybe linking it to their current experience. It's a work in progress. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that is definitely a challenging thing right now. And I think everybody is missing that in-person visceral experience with whether it's music or art or theater. Yes, we can see the same things on the screen, but it's not the same thing as standing in front of it or interacting with your subject in your case, or traveling to your loom. That must be very, very challenging.
Luckily, I have a couple of looms. So I have looms here in Gemseg that I can weave on, but not to the same complexity as Facing You is. That graphic image that you can weave on a Jacquard loom,
Mhm.
I can't do that here. So,
Well, can
and
you
that is so central to my working. So what I'm working on now are, that Facing You was woven white on white. And then I dyed it after weaving it. And so now what I'm playing with more is the dyeing process. I can fool around with dyeing and see, so I'm concentrating on that, and that will come back into the next pieces, I'm sure. But anyway,
right?
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your process, the digital jacquard weaving process and the shibori dyeing technique? I'm curious. I think other people are interested to understand this, especially with the digital. Most people, I think, are accustomed to weaving as a hand made affair, but with the digital process, can you explain that a little bit?
It's still hand woven. I still stand and I still weave, but many weavers actually now use their computers to generate their patterns.
Okay.
So you could generate your pattern on your computer and weave it on your floor loom with petals that you would, you press the right order of petals to get your pattern. I have a loom like that here. Next generation is that you attach your computer to your loom, and even if you have complex patterns, the loom helps. You press a button and the program changes to the next order of what you need to weave.
Mhm.
On a jacquard loom, every thread is individually controlled by that computer. So we have 3,000 threads, and in any, on every line, you tell which thread to go up and down. I use Photoshop, a really user-friendly program, to make my images. It's not really complicated.
Mhm.
It's lots of fun. I really enjoy it. But I when people started to use these jacquard looms, the images they wove were very graphic because it's white warp with a black weft, and so it looks like a woven image. And I taught in North Carolina at North Carolina State for a little while, and there was a woman who lived in the Appalachian Mountains and taught at a community college, and she had developed this woven shibori technique. Shibori is anything that you make a resist on cloth and you dye it, and that resist doesn't let the dye penetrate to those areas that you resisted. You could do it with elastic bands or stitching.
Mhm.
What she developed was a way of weaving a pattern in. So you weave your cloth, and every number of threads you weave in another thread. That's your shibori thread. That's going to be your resist thread. And so your your image continues, and then the pattern is woven in on top. You pull that, after you get it woven, you pull it off really tightly. In fact, I happen to have in my lap a cloth that I've woven that's pulled really tightly.
Okay.
And you can see on this end it's white because I haven't dyed it. And then there's a gradation dye in it. And
Mhm.
so if I pull, so this is very loosely tied and the dye penetrates all the way in. I'm going to pull it one more time. and then the dye will only hit this outer part, and the inside lighter, this will be a lighter blue, will become what you see in Facing You, that pattern that's underneath. There's another pattern on top.
Mhm.
This doesn't have any graphic image in it, but it'll still be beautiful, and it'll be a lovely scarf that I wear.
Well, yeah,
That's
because,
how it works. It's a really, and it's magic because as a weaver, weaving is a lot about control. Every thread, how it goes, where it works. When you pull the piece together like this and you put it in a dye pot,
you don't know what's going to happen.
you hope you have an idea, you've done tests, but you don't know. So in this piece, there's a like a white area right over one of the eyes, and there's a wrinkle in the other eye, and that's just that dyeing process
Mm.
adding its magic.
Mhm, mhm.
And at first you go, oh, that's wrong, and then you go, oh, that's very, I like that. You
Yeah.
know, it softens the image, it makes it a little more mysterious.
Mhm.
And when I started to do this, that was just it. I was in love with this process.
Mhm. Certainly adds a layer of complexity. And I think anything that has sort of a chance element, a random element, is always an exciting piece of that process, for sure. For sure.
And I think especially after you've worked hard to gain control, it's really wonderful to suddenly have something that throws it all up into the air and go, oh, okay, you can control that, but you can't control this. And as an artist, it's always a balance between those things. What do you want to do? What can you do? And what actually happens?
Mhm. So tell us, how did you come to weaving? Where did that impetus come from with you?
I mentioned my parents were immigrants and they immigrated from Latvia to Montreal, Canada. And so as a child, I spoke no English. My parents felt it was very important for me to know my culture. So we lived in a completely Latvian household until I went to kindergarten. It was terrifying to go to kindergarten, not know any English. So, but I fell in love with the textiles, the things that were around our home that were different from other homes. And I had to go to Latvian school and I had to go to Latvian dance, and I was a Latvian volleyball player. And of course, I met women who were embroidering, and I had to go to Latvian summer camp where there was someone weaving backstrap looms. And I learned how to weave on a dowel with a pencil, because that's all you need. And that was it. I was in love, and I never looked back. And my mother was very worried because how can you make a living as a weaver? But I always say, if you have a real passion for something, you'll find a way. And I've been lucky to teach, but I continue to love to learn anything new, like dye gradations, like let's learn about color interaction. And so yeah.
Mhm. That's
So it's
fabulous.
that Latvian, and that Latvian identity in the cloth is core to my work even now.
Mhm, mhm. And a lot of your early work actually sort of extrapolated that history from these pieces.
Because as I was growing up, no one had heard of Latvia. Latvia was part of the USSR. So I took it also, for me, it was trying to understand what that was. I was Canadian, I was Latvian. Was I Canadian? Was I Latvian? What were these things? And weaving it helped me understand it and be it. But it also had this other, it helped me to tell other people about Latvia. So I remember my first show, people said, what is that? Where is it? And I went, okay, I'll add a little history to the show. So, and so by the time because I studied at NASCAD in Halifax, and by the time I graduated from NASCAD, everyone knew Latvian history really.
Well,
For
kudos
me,
to you.
it was learning about it first and understanding it. And, being, if you're an artist and a maker, to spend the time with something, to think, to meditate is, a way of really soaking that information in and then making it your own. So Latvian, even when I wove something traditionally Latvian, I changed it. I changed the colors and I changed what it I tried to put my meaning onto that Latvian culture.
Mhm. So when I look at Facing You, it reminds me very much of the Fallen Soldiers series that you did, in the sense that you're focusing only on the eyes. You're not showing us a portrait of the whole face. Can you talk a little bit about that and where that comes from?
When I started to, so this is a pretty early piece that I wove with this technique.
Mhm.
And so when I started this technique, I thought, okay, I need a face. And I was, in a university setting, and you have to be responsible. You can't just take anybody's face. You have to be responsible about whose face you took. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll just take my face because, I can wreck it, I can mutilate it. So this is actually a pretty early piece that I wove with that technique, trying to work it out. And I was still trying to be pretty good about it. I got more and more destructive with my face as I moved through, and I've shown some of those at Mem Hall as well in the gallery. So this was an early piece of me learning this technique and understanding it. And I feel like it was a triptych where I had my the bottom part of my face maybe in juxtaposition, and that didn't work as well. So learning that the eyes really say so much about who you are. And I didn't even think about this piece when I started The Fallen Soldiers, although I had gone back to my eyes and my face and tearing it apart and putting it together in different permutations. And then when The Fallen Soldiers came to my mind, it was clear to me that I didn't even need the nose, I just needed the eyes.
Mhm.
So it's a part of just looking, learning, and thinking. Like you can see, I cut off part of, how little do you need to get a sense of someone? And when I started The Fallen Soldiers, I think I tested 5, and I thought they're all going to look the same, but they
They don't.
no, they did not. And so, and some of them were taken from very low level photographs, and it's still amazing how much personality comes out. And now, of course, with COVID, so
Mhm.
what I really want to do for Pier 21 is a series of mask, like just the top of a mask.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm trying to integrate that into what might happen there, but I'm not sure if it will. But I feel like that will happen in my work, whether it'll be in Pier 21 or for another exhibition, maybe. Yeah. 'Cause I'm really interested is that now that I go to the store and I only see people's eyes,
Mhm.
do I recognize these people? It's harder to recognize these people. How do we recognize people? Do we need, in fact, all of that information to know who someone is? So it's
Mhm.
very interesting to me to look at masks. And I've been taking images of people with masks, what masks say, what eyes say. And I feel like that's the next series I'm really interested in reading.
Interesting. Yes, I noticed that too in a grocery store or whatever, recognizing people by their silhouettes or by the way they move or the tone of voice. So we're really relying on other markers now than we ever have before, I think. And you might be smiling at somebody behind your mask, but unless we're sort of in this stage where we're crinkling our eyes to indicate that, we're smiling as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's difficult to communicate because we're so used to that, the mouth and the nose and the face all as a unit.
Yeah. And I also feel like, again, through my career, I've used the face as a place to overlay patterning. And so now everybody is overlaying patterning. And what they're overlaying is so interesting to me. So I feel like there's really something happening here for me.
That's very
I'm
interesting.
sure I won't be the only one, but I have to do it.
This project that we're working on here with these interviews is part of International Women's Day. Can you tell me how your experience as a woman has sustained you in your career?
I've thought about this question quite a bit, and I feel like there are there have been so many women who've been helpful and mentoring and guiding, but I think 2 women in particular have been really important. One is an author from Toronto, Marlene New Bessie Phillip, and I met her at Banff, and she was a writer in residence, and she read her family was from Trinidad Tobago, and happens that Latvia only colonized one place in the world, and that was Trinidad and Tobago. So she and I immediately hit it off in a big way.
Hmm.
And when she read her writing, she read it in her voice, and her voice was so amazing, and it changed how the words entered the world. And somehow that was fundamental to me in thinking about weaving, and how weaving and pattern, how can my voice lend itself to my work in the way that her voice lent itself to her reading of her work. So it's just a moment in time that was just, you kind of know it, but in a way I felt it that I hadn't felt. And forever after, when I read her reading, I hear her voice. And then another person who was Nell Outemans, Fredericton, hero. And what I would go to Nell welcomed me to Fredericton when I moved here from Montreal. She was really, really welcoming. But she also, when I would go to visit her, she would have been up in her studio right after breakfast, and she would stay in her studio until supper time, and then she would make supper. And so she just had a rhythm. Her studio was important. She did other things for sure, but she came back to that rhythm of being in your studio. And I think especially during COVID time now, I often think of her and I think, okay, had my breakfast, time to go to my studio, work in my studio. And so especially during this time, she's come back to me in that way of lending me some of her rhythm of life, which is important. So I think while I've had mentors and many more that I feel like should mention, but how many hours do we have? I feel like as a weaver, weaving is a woman's world primarily. And while in many institutions and schools, men get hired to teach weaving, I think I've been lucky that I have been hired. I worked at Concordia, at the Craft College, at North Carolina State. And so I could help other women and weavers and men, young, who wanted to weave, gain their voices. And so that was always amazing to me, to let whoever it is hear their voice, especially young women. What do you want to say? You have important things to say, and you can say them through this medium of weaving. But I think the way I feel I've most perhaps, contributed as a woman in the world has been, I've been active in the Textile Society of America. And I've just finished 2 years as outgoing president, and I was president for 2 years prior to that, and incoming president. So it's been a 6-year period of time. And the Textile Society of America is made up of amazing people, predominantly women. From everyone has a passion for textiles: curators, museum researchers, archaeologists, weavers, makers, dyers. And this organization was really looking at diversity. When I entered, it was just a little niggle of a conversation. And during my time there, it became a very open and broad conversation. I feel like TSA, we're in motion of welcoming all people, but especially a diversity of women to come and have their voices heard and speak. And I feel like this year we had a symposium, first one ever we held online. We had almost twice the number of people because people could attend. They didn't have to go to Vancouver or Washington, or they could come from all over the world. And so we heard makers speaking from India, from everywhere. And so I have to say that's one of the things that I've been really, really proud of in terms of opening a space for many voices, and in this case, particularly women's voices, but not exclusively, to be heard. And I'm very proud of that. I'm also very happy to be done and move forward and back with Nell in my studio.
That's wonderful. So we have you on the books for the UNB Art Centre for September, featuring commemorations, an exhibition that you had at the New Brunswick Museum 2 years ago, I think now. And so we're very much looking forward to that. So I'm not going to ask you too much about that because we'll be exhibiting that. But apart from the Pier 21 exhibition, what's next for you? Where do you see your work going from here?
Well, actually, it will be going to the Art Gallery of Burlington. It was supposed to be there this past fall.
Okay.
I'm hoping it will be going this summer. And that project, the Art Gallery of Burlington was very much about a community. There are studios there. There are classes that happen there. So when I went there I went for a 2-week residency, I really felt that it was about the people that are there. So I've done, in this case, eyes and hands. So it could be the person working the cash register in the store. It could be someone's at their computer. It could be someone weaving. It could be someone turning wood. But so it's a eyes and hands kind of combination. So that will be heading off there, I hope. Because it's everything is day by day now, isn't it?
Very difficult to predict.
And then I'm working on Pier 21, and I really do feel like I need to address the masks and the eyes.
Right.
So I have the Art Gallery of Burlington exhibition is done. It's sitting in a pile waiting to go. And so I'm really turned my attention to Pier 21 and I think this, and of course my dying. Yes. I'm glad I had this. It was like sitting on the chair and I thought, I think I might just bring this out.
Was that chemical dye or is that a natural dye?
It's chemical dye because, the natural dyes, I just did this one class with, and this Shibori is dependent on the size of the chemical molecule to work. And so in a way, I have an experience of this vocabulary. If I start with natural dyes, I need to relearn that vocabulary.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway,
so you need to find a space for that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So it might be a mixture. There were a couple of dyes that I thought, ooh. Of course, I did a little Shibori in each of the little tests to see, and some of them worked quite beautifully. We'll see if it comes out or not. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just another tool in your kit, I guess, for exploration. Well,
exactly.
I think that's pretty much all the questions I have. If there's anything else you would like to add to our conversation, I'd be thrilled to hear it.
No, I really appreciate having the opportunity to have the conversation with you and with anyone else who's listening. And I hope that the galleries are open and that we can meet in person by the time that my show happens.
Oh, me
Keep
too.
our fingers crossed. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much, Vita. It was wonderful to talk to you today. And we love the piece in our collection and we're very grateful to you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.